Miss Freeland just gave her mid-year budget update as the finance minister, and it shows that in just 7 months after she presented her big spending April budget, she was already on track to spend $20 billion over budget.
This is the Canadian Taxpayers Federation podcast, where we're dedicated to lower taxes, less waste, and more accountable government. I'm Chris Sims. I'm the Alberta director. My partner in crime is Franco Terrazzano. He's a federal director holding down the fort for us in Ottawa. Now, you get to do lots of fun and or wonky stuff in Ottawa, Franco. You guys put together our New Year's tax changes for the new year. And that's basically where we let everybody know, hey, this is what you're going to be paying more or less of. Now, I don't know about you, but I need a break. I think a lot of people are done after this year. We're glad to see the back end of this thing. So do you have any good news? Do we maybe have a tax break in the new year? Pretty please, Santa?
Not from Ottawa. Sure not. Man. We're actually seeing Trudeau hike 5 different federal taxes in 2023. CPP tax up, EI tax up, carbon tax up, second carbon tax up, and liquor taxes all going up.
Okay, so it's awful. So I try to keep the happy in my happy warrior. Like, it's sometimes a struggle. And the last few months especially have been quite the struggle because of inflation and everybody seemingly paying more every time they turn around. Just a personal anecdote. I don't know if you've noticed this, but when I'm out doing my big grocery shop, because I'm a mom and a wife and all that stuff, and I do the big grocery shop on Saturdays, I see more people putting more stuff back when they're approaching the checkout. And that's tough to see. And it's even stuff like ground beef, like the basics. They're struggling to afford this. And this is where this really ticks me off with this federal government, is because they seem to be missing that connection now. They're not reaching their constituents because lots of folks are struggling right now. So you're telling me they're ignoring all those metrics, all those real world things, and they've got 5 tax hikes for us?
Yeah, that's exactly what we're saying. Five different federal tax hikes coming from Ottawa in 2023. Now, to be as fair as possible, the federal government is increasing the basic personal amount, which is a tax-free portion of all of our income. So the government is doing that, but there's 2 issues. First, although it's increasing, it's not increasing as fast as inflation is going, which means that our inflation adjusted income tax bill is still going up. But number 2, and kind of more to the point, is that even though our tax-free portion of the income is going up, it's not going up as high as the payroll tax hikes are going. So at the end of the day, if you're making $40,000 or more next year, your federal income-based taxes are going up because of payroll tax hikes.
Oh, okay. So you're calling them payroll taxes. We call them payroll taxes. They are bloody payroll taxes. Yep. But a lot of folks who aren't in this game don't quite understand what we mean by a payroll tax. So can you break that down for us a little bit? What are they and how much are they increasing?
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially just the mandatory payments that you are forced to make, that your employer is forced to make to the government through the Canada Pension Plan payments or EI payments. So these are both taxes, and that's what we mean by payroll taxes. So this year, if you're making $67,000 or more, so very middle class, certainly not the fat cats here, but if you're making $67,000 or more, then you're going to have to pay $255 extra compared to 2022 through the CPP tax, right? Your employer will also have to pay an extra $255 in 2023 compared to 2022. So if you're that same middle-class worker, you're also going to have to fork over an extra $50 in 2023 through the EI mandatory payments compared to 2022. And your employer will have to fork over an extra $70 compared to 2022. Now, at first glance, that might not sound like a lot, but that's just the increase. Okay, your total payroll tax bill, if you're making $67K or more next year, is about $4,700. Your employer will also have to pay more than $5,100. So we're talking about thousands and thousands of dollars that must be paid to the government through these payroll taxes.
Yeah, and these are serious deductions, folks. So, back in my day when I used to get paid with a paper check, you used to be able to see immediately where your deductions were. And I think sometimes some of us lose track of that now that everything seems to be electronic. But thank you, Franco, because you're actually putting the dollar figure on that. Speaking of dollar figures, man, it's hard for me to complain here because I'm in Alberta and I pay the lowest gasoline taxes in Canada. It's still a high price at the pump because we have high federal taxes as well. But people are really struggling to fuel up their vehicles. So it doesn't matter if you're driving a mom minivan or a dad pickup truck or whatnot. People are struggling to fill up with gasoline and diesel. And I hate bringing this up, but it's a fact and it's a big cost. Carbon taxes are going up next year as well. And it isn't just on driving, it's on home heating too.
Yeah, that's right. And we've already seen the carbon tax, Trudeau's carbon tax, go up 3 times since the beginning of COVID-19. They're going up again to 14 cents per liter of gasoline, to 12 cents per cubic meter of natural gas starting April 1, 2023. Now, we turn on the TV, we hear on the radio that the Trudeau government's claims that somehow the carbon tax and rebate scheme is going to make you better off. Well, the government's own independent, nonpartisan budget watchdog shows that the government is using magic math. According to that parliamentary budget officer, the carbon tax is costing the average household anywhere between $400 all the way up to about $850 next year, even after those rebates. And Simmer, not to be the rain cloud, the perpetual rain cloud that I am these days, but the government is also going to be bringing in a second carbon tax through fuel regulations next year, which will add up to 13 cents per liter extra to the price of gasoline by 2030.
Yeah, it's gross. For folks who are listening in British Columbia, surprise, you've already been paying a second carbon tax for the past several years. And that is why you have the highest fuel prices in the entire continent, because you've got the highest fuel taxes there too. So unfortunately, they're taking that show on the road. That's going to be, the standard across Canada pretty soon, except for a couple of places. So Franco, it isn't just driving, as we mentioned off the top here, this little bit here on the carbon tax. Canadians, I don't know what it is where you are. I think it's minus 22 outside right now. Ugh. If I weren't running my natural gas furnace, my pipes would burst. But for that luxury of staying alive and warm, we're punished with the carbon tax. So you're punished for using natural gas, propane, or furnace oil to heat your home. It's one of those things that just drives me crazy because this is not something you can opt out of in Canada. It's not a nice to have. Do you want a paper or plastic bag? No, you can't do that. We put out a call a little while ago to supporters and radio listeners saying, hey, send us your heat bill, because you can read all the data and stats and whatnot you want on the internet. Show me your actual heating bill. And we were able to work out how much people were paying the carbon tax. Dude, it's between $30 a month and sometimes $100 a month, depending on what kind of house you are and where you are in Canada. So that's a huge amount of money just being punished for staying warm in the winter. So folks, you have every right to be ticked off. Now, I try to say this jokingly, but if you're so ticked off that you're reaching for, your glass of scotch, Franco, prices are going up, taxes are going up on booze too, right? Next year? Yeah. So if this whole conversation drives you to drink, well, too bad. The government is taking more from your wallet there. I don't know, man. Maybe you had a tough day at work. Maybe old man McKay is really grinding your gears saying, hey, no more passive voice in all your op-eds. I don't know. Maybe you got the Rugrats running around. Hey, maybe even your in-laws are coming on the weekend and you need just a little bit of holiday spirit to get through that encounter. Well, when you go pick up that bottle of Pinot, when you go get that case of Keith's, when you go pick up that bottle of rum, the government is going to be taking more money from you in 2023 there again. And it's because of what we call this alcohol escalator tax. Sounds nice enough, doesn't it? But in fact, fun. No,
it's not. It's a very undemocratic form of taxation. So the Trudeau government, one of the few budgets prior, I believe it was in the 2017 budget, brought in this escalator tax, which essentially says every year the federal alcohol excise taxes go up with inflation. Now, if these politicians think that you're not paying enough tax, they should have the spine to vote on tax increases. Instead, they use this escalator to increase their tax take without having to vote on it in the House of Commons. Now, one of the key things here is that it goes up with inflation. Well, what's going on with inflation right now? It's sky high, which means that next April, when this alcohol escalator tax cranks up again, we're all going to see a federal tax hike on our alcohol of about 6.3%. That's a huge increase. And remember, you're already paying about half of that beer in taxes, about 2/3 of that glass of Pinot in taxes, and that bottle of scotch you mentioned there, Simmer, well, about 3/4 of spirits is taxes.
When I first joined the CTF, and I've always loved the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, I used to book them all the time when I was working in radio. I didn't know that. And I think more people need to know that. Half the cost of your beer, 70% of your wine, don't care if it's in a box or in a bottle or whatnot, and 75%, of your rum that you're pouring into your eggnog to go full Clark Griswold because of all these taxes. That's taxes already. And the other thing I forgot, I knew we had an escalator tax. You were telling me about this earlier. I forgot it was attached to inflation. And what is horrible right now? Inflation. So sorry, folks, that's a lot of bad news. We do have a little bit of glimmer of hope and good news, and it's coming from the provinces. So let's try to, pick up some spirits here, no pun intended. What's happening in the provinces? Are we getting some cuts there?
Well, we're talking about the bad news of these inflation-tied tax hikes. Well, there's some good news on the inflation-tied taxes. Alberta, your neck of the woods, my mom's neck of the woods, is actually ending bracket creep. Now, what's bracket creep? It's a very sneaky form of income tax hike that essentially uses inflation to increase politicians' tax take. So what's supposed to happen is that tax brackets are supposed to move up with inflation. But bracket creep stops that process, which means that you can be bumped into paying a higher tax bracket, even though what you can actually afford to buy hasn't gone up. And over time, inflation will also erode that tax-free portion of everyone's income. So Alberta is scrapping its bracket creep tax hike. I think that'll save, what's the figure, Simmer, over there? How much is it going to save?
Around $300 a year per person is what the outgoing Premier Jason Kenney said, and that is what has been repeated now by new Premier Daniel Smith's government as well. So around $300. So that's a very big grocery shop.
And there's some more tax relief in Alberta, isn't there?
Yes, and it's my favorite. we're suspending the fuel tax on gasoline and diesel, so that's nothing to sneeze at either.
No, and Ontario Premier Doug Ford, he's extending his gas tax relief. But you know where there's also some really big tax relief coming is in New Brunswick. So let me just look at my notes here so I don't confuse myself. But you essentially have a few things going on in New Brunswick. The province increased the basic personal amount, the tax-free portion of our income. Then you have the top 4 tax brackets all being reduced, with the 4th bracket being consolidated into the 3rd bracket. Now, all of that's very wonky, but essentially that means that a New Brunswick taxpayer could be saving up to $1,300 per year because of this income tax relief. So good tax relief over there in New Brunswick.
Yeah, it's good to see that. And we have to give credit where it's due, because we spend a lot of time railing on politicians for not listening. So when they do actually listen, we have to give them kudos. So good job, New Brunswick. Good job, Ontario. And good job here in Alberta. Because now the suspension of, it's not just gasoline, it's diesel. That means that the only taxes we pay at the pump now are federal. So it's a pretty good move, and it's real money. If you fill up a pickup truck and you're saving 13 cents a liter, you're saving about $15 per fill up. So you can I can get a jug of milk and a roast chicken for that every time I go grocery shopping. So that's real money back in people's pockets. So good to see that. Happy to end on a good note with that. But man, wouldn't it be nice if some of this, listening skills actually translated over to Ottawa?
Sure would. But you know what? I'm looking outside the window here, and I do not see my bacon flying out of the fridge. So I don't know. I don't know if that's going to happen. But look, all kidding aside, the federal government is raising taxes, but it doesn't have to be, right? No. It doesn't have to be. I mean, While Ottawa is raising all of our tax bills, we did identify 51 other national governments during the pandemic to ease the pain of inflation, do the right thing and cut taxes. It includes more than half of G7 countries, more than half of G20 countries, 2/3 of the countries within the OECD. So many of our industrialized peers are doing the right thing. And look, at the end of the day, the reason that we're paying too much tax is because Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his band of bureaucrats are wasting too much money, right? Look, Miss Freeland just gave her a mid-year budget update as the finance minister, and it shows that in just 7 months after she presented her big spending April budget, she was already on track to spend $20 billion over budget. $20 billion. That's a 2 and a whole lot of zeros, but here's what it means. It means that Ms. Freeland could have cut the GST from 5% to 3% and still have room to lower the deficit just by keeping spending in line with what she said she was going to spend in her April budget. So folks, they're making life harder with their tax hikes, and it's because they're wasting money here, there, and everywhere.
I'm glad you put it that way, because 20 billion, I mean, you start getting into like Carl Sagan counting galaxies there. It's hard to
carry the three,
track, right? But you're saying that on that amount of waste, they could have reduced the GST down to 3%
and still have room to lower the deficit.
Holy smokes. Okay, like folks, like keep this in mind. Like think of how much people freaked out over a glass of orange juice, right? Think about how much, people justifiably freaked out over the $1 billion boondoggle over the long gun registry. That was 1 billion. This is 20 billion over her own budget, which was already blowing way too much money. So folks, they really need to get a message here. They've got the fiscal discipline of a frat house in Ottawa. It is just not good to see. So to give you some agency and some hope, though, you can speak up and you can push back. And so do yourself a favor, give yourself a Christmas present this year. Pick up the phone, open up your email, send a note, right, Franco? Send a note to your member of parliament, because for every one note they get, they figure that they get 100 more people feeling the same way that haven't said so. And when we do speak up and push back, they start listening, we hope. So Franco, thank you very much for the good news and also the bad news, because when we know the bad news, we can fix it. Thanks, man.